Good morning and welcome to this, the fifth meeting of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee of 2025. And by way of an introductory excitement, our first item of business is to agree on whether to take item 4 in private. Are my colleagues content to consider our item 4 in private, which is about our work programme for the rest of this year? In private, we are. Great, thank you. Can I also at this point acknowledge and record the apologies of the Deputy Convener, David Torrance, who is still not well, and we send him our best wishes and hope to see him again soon. Agenda item 2 is the consideration of continued petitions. And the first of those is quite a long-standing petition, which is petition number 1859, which is to retain falconers' rights to practice upland falconry in Scotland. And I can see Barry Blyther, who is the progenitor of the petition, is with us in the public gallery this morning, as he has been, I think, on each and every occasion that we've had an opportunity to consider this petition. So good morning and welcome back. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to amend the Animals and Wildlife Act of 2020 to allow mountain hares to be hunted for the purposes of falconry. And we last considered this in November 23 when we agreed to write to the Minister for Environment and Land Reform, Police Scotland and Nature Scot. We've also agreed to seek a parliamentary debate on the issues raised in the petition, and we are aware of the pressure on debate slots, but we are still continuing to seek that debate on this petition. And in addition, there is an opportunity next week at the Conveners Group, where we'll be having our 6th monthly meeting with the First Minister, where it may well be that's an option for me to raise this directly with the First Minister at that meeting. In our letter, we recommended that the Scottish Government produce guidance to clarify how falconers can ensure they are acting in accordance with the legislation. We recommended that the guidance should clarify, and these were the issues to clarify, how falconers can participate in licensed activities, the areas in which there is not a high density of mountain hare, and what action falconers should take if their bird accidentally takes a mountain hare. And I'm pleased to say that the then Minister for Energy and Environment accepted this recommendation. The response to the committee states that the Scottish Government will seek to engage with relevant stakeholders to produce the guidance we recommended. Nature Scot's response to the committee states that it will support the guidance for falconers by providing small-scale maps indicating upland areas of Scotland with no known populations of mountain hares, sparse populations and higher population densities. To build on the available information on the density of mountain hare, Nature Scot will ensure that falconers' reports of mountain hares are recorded. The guidance for falconers will encourage them to take part in the volunteer mountain hare survey to help fill in gaps of knowledge about the distribution and numbers of mountain hares. The written submission from Police Scotland provides an overview of how incidents of mountain hare being taken with a bird of prey would be recorded. The response notes that each incident has to be judged entirely on its own merit in terms of identifying or disproving criminality. The submission also responds to our query about how Police Scotland will share information about such incidents with Nature Scot, and it states that Police Scotland and Nature Scot have well-established lines of communication for sharing various aspects of wildlife and environmental information. These include pre-arranged recurring meetings and also more spontaneous information sharing meetings. Now, the petitioner's written submission highlights a Stage 2 amendment to the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Scotland Bill, which created an exemption to allow falconers to take red grouse without requiring a licence. This amendment was lodged by the Scottish Government following feedback from stakeholders, and the petition submission points out that part of the rationale for this amendment was that the number of grouse taken by falconers is in fact very, very small. The submission states that the amendment protecting mountain hares was designed to prevent large-scale culls by shooting. The petitioner believes that falconry is a bycatch that should be exempted because, like with grouse, the number of hares taken by falconry will represent a tiny fraction of those that were historically taken for shooting. And, of course, had this Stage 3 amendment been tabled at an appropriate time, then there would have been a much more detailed examination of this at Stage 3 before it was passed, with all the consequential actions. So there are a number of things we can do. I think, given that the Government has said they accept the recommendation in relation to guidance, do colleagues have any suggestions for action? Mr Ewing?
Yes, a great deal of material has been provided since we last met, and I think it's only fair to allude to some of it. I was astonished to see that Nature Scott are arguing we don't have enough information about the extent to which there is predation of hares. I mean, of course we have that information. They've actually got the temerity to say that several more years' worth of data are needed before this survey can provide a clearer picture. That seems to be an argument, unfortunately, for doing little. At the same time, however, we have had two submissions on very recently, on the 4th and the 14th of March, from Barry Blyther, and I gather that he may have some further information for us, which he hasn't yet had an opportunity to convey. And firstly, I therefore suggest that we do give him the opportunity to provide that if there's additional information, which I believe there is, which may be quite positive, indicating some supportive action from the Minister and, to be fair, Nature Scott. And I do also think it's fair. I mean, there was a copious submission from Barry Blyther, which explains the pretty sad state that because of the inability to allow his falcon to practice its natural activities in flying, and the same with an eagle. The male Stanley has been unable to mate with Roxanne, the female. So that is really pretty sad and pretty heart-wrenching, as Barry puts it. So, in the interest of encouraging avian amour, convener, I think, you know, to be serious, it's pretty sad when Nature Scott prevent nature taking its natural course. I mean, it's a bit perverse if you come to think of it. That should be exactly what they encourage. Having said all that, I do think that we should debate this in the Chamber on the basis of the principle that Barry Blyther and his colleagues were not provided with the opportunity of being heard when the mountain hare ban was introduced. The current minister has gone further than previous ministers in admitting that this is entirely wrong and indefensible. It's taken far, far too long to get to that stage, and I think we should go to a debate. But we don't need to do that if the minister will take sufficient action. I don't think sufficient action relies in guidance myself. I think primary legislation is almost certainly required, and I don't see why that can't be done in the one of the bills that's passing at the moment, the Environment Bill. If there's a will, there's a way. It's a very simple thing to be done, so why don't they just do it? So I think we should write to the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero to seek an update on the Scottish Government's work on the guidance, but clarify also how we can rectify this mischief which plainly occurred. I believe we've also agreed to write, excuse me if I'm repeating a matter already in the record, to the Standards Committee to raise the point of principle, to indicate we're minded to have a debate, to ask for their views on this matter, because I think it's arisen in connection with another amendment that was sought to have been brought forward at stage 3 without debate. So I would also encourage, if members agree, that we write to the Standards Committee convener raising this issue of principle. We're minded to have a debate. But of course, if there's action that can be taken to sort it out without a debate, without the embarrassment that that would cause to the government, for not admitting we got it wrong. Why can't they just admit we got it wrong? I mean, there's no defence whatsoever. It is a slam dunk, politically speaking. So I hope my candour will be noted by my friend Jim Fairley, the Minister, and that he will resort to the Churchillian action this day.
Thank you, Mr Ewing. I think we might just formalise the issue in relation to writing the Standards Committee, because in the recent bill in relation to a Stage 3 amendment that was proposed in respect of dog collars, I think, Mr Golden, the Parliament took the view that there hadn't been an opportunity to properly consider these matters. And of course, this amendment is an example of exactly that. It was a Stage 3 amendment where there wasn't proper consideration of the potential consequences. So I do think that the Parliament has acted differently, and it would be right to write to the committee to say that there ought to be a principle in all of this that the Parliament adheres to, because otherwise we are passing legislation with consequences that could be foreseen if they'd been properly examined, but obviously were unforeseen by many of the members at the time because they didn't, they'd had the proper opportunity to be alerted to what might follow as a consequence of that amendment being passed at the time. So I think we want to do that. I also wonder if if we are trying to contact Mr Blythe, who's here, if there is the opportunity to get some information quickly, then that might allow this to be one of the subjects that I'm able to raise with the First Minister at the Conveners Group 6-monthly meeting with the First Minister next week. So that would be one of maybe a couple of issues I could draw to his attention. But I want to do that in full possession of the latest facts, and perhaps just to agree by correspondence with colleagues on the committee the nature of the question I might put. Does that seem reasonable?
It seems reasonable. Mr. Blythe has assented that he will provide that information quickly. I've interpreted the hand signals correctly.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we've written hand signals into the record before, but we'll acknowledge Mr. Ewing's belief that the suitable hand signals were conveyed.
Hand signals will be provided
to the committee in relation to that. So we'll keep the petition open, take forward the suggestions as Mr. Ewing has made them, and the other suggestions that have been agreed. Are the committee content that we proceed on that basis? Noting, of course, that Stanley's 24, so he's nearly as old as this Parliament itself. So, as you say, let's see if we can revive, what was it you called it? Avian amour for Stanley, Mr. Ewing. Okay, thank you. That brings us to petition number 1953 to review education support staff roles, lodged by Rosin Taylor-Young. And this petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to review education support ES staff roles in order to consider, and here we go, urgently raising wages for education support staff across primary and secondary schools sectors to £26,000 per annum, increasing the hours of the working day for ES staff from 27.5 to 35 hours, allowing ESS to work on personal learning plans with teachers, take part in multi-agency meetings, requiring ESS to register with Scottish Social Services Council and paying ES staff monthly. Now, we last considered this petition at our meeting on the 20th of March 24, when we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills. We requested an update on the Butte House Agreement commitment to explore options for the development of an accredited qualification and registration programme for additional sport needs assistance. The final proposals were due to be brought forward by autumn 23. The Cabinet Secretary's written response from May 24 stated that she was considering the outcome of this work. We've since received an update from officials which states that a draft report is being considered by the Cabinet Secretary, but that this has taken longer than anticipated due to the required engagement with a range of stakeholders. The submission states that the intention is to publish a final report this month or next month. The petitioner has provided a written submission which highlights the increasing number of children with additional support needs and states that teachers and support staff are not adequately equipped to handle this. She highlights a particular case in which a staff member in an ASL school had been employed with no induction, training or risk assessments. The staff member was not provided with de-escalation training, BSL certification, Makaton certification or specialist knowledge of complex disabilities. The staff member then went on to suffer serious workplace injuries which prevented them from working. The petitioner's submission also states that education support staff in ASL schools often carry out medical duties including oxygen tanks, insertion of catheters, administration of medications and hoisting or lifting for intimate care. The petition concludes by stating, and I quote, "It is time to put all these policies and action plans into place. Councils are crying out for support staff in schools and are unable to recruit or retain these staff due to workplace violence, lack of training, low pay and no career pathways." In the light of all of that, do members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr Golden.
Thank you, Convener. I appreciate that there may be a full answer forthcoming, but as we don't have one to date, I think we should write to the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills to highlight the increasing requirement for additional support needs assistance and the pressures faced by staff as set out by the petitioner. We should also highlight the medical duties carried out by staff as set out by the petitioner and seek a view on whether this level of medical care should be provided without registration or indeed training. Furthermore, I think we should highlight the delay to the Scottish Government's publication of the report on the development of an accredited qualification and registration programme for additional sport needs assistance. and ask why there has been such a significant delay in publishing the report. I appreciate the comments you've made on this point, Convener. And finally, seek information on how the Scottish Government intends to take action to address the issue during this parliamentary session.
Thank you, Mr Gold. Quite a comprehensive series of suggestions. Are colleagues content? Well, we'll keep the petition open and proceed on that basis. I happen to notice in the gallery that we are joined this morning by both Paul Sweeney and Jackie Bailey, and in order to facilitate what I'm sure is a busy morning for them, I'm going to reorder the petitions, and we will move now to them as they come. So the first one is, in fact, petition number 2028 to extend the concessionary bus travel scheme to include people seeking asylum in Scotland. This has been lodged by Pinar Aksu on behalf of Maryhill Integration Network and Doa Abumar on behalf of the Voices Network. And the petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to extend the concessionary travel scheme to include all people seeking asylum in Scotland, regardless of age. And we're joined again, as we have been in the past, by our colleague Paul Sweeney, who continues to take a keen interest in this issue. So good morning to you, Mr Sweeney. We last considered this 15th of May when we agreed to write to Transport Scotland. In June 24, we received a response from Transport Scotland indicating that work was ongoing to establish the most appropriate way to deliver free bus travel for people seeking asylum in Scotland. At that stage, Transport Scotland also told us that they were using the £2 million budget allocation to develop a national pilot scheme to provide free bus travel for those people seeking asylum who were not already covered by existing concessionary travel schemes. It was also noted that this funding was allocated for a single year only. Members will likely be aware that since the Transport Scotland response was received, plans to extend free bus travel to people seeking asylum, which we first secured in a previous conveners group meeting with the First Minister at that time, Humza Yousaf, who agreed to look at this and then subsequently agreed. But members will recall that those plans were then initially scrapped as part of the Scottish Government's plans to cut public spending. However, they have since been revived, with funding for the scheme included in the 25-26 budget, which was recently approved by Parliament. We've also received a submission from the petitioners which calls on the committee to seek further information from Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government on next steps and a timeframe for taking forward the commitment to provide free bus travel for people seeking asylum in Scotland. Now, I have to say, I think the committee is kind of minded, given that the aims of the petition have been in themselves secured, to consider whether there's more that we can do. But before we have that discussion, can I invite Paul Sweeney to offer his thoughts to us?
Well, thank you, Convener, and it's a pleasure to join you this morning. I'd like to echo your comments on the work done by Pinar Aksu of Maryhill Integration Network and Doa Abumar of the Red Cross Voices Network, who really drove the public campaign in relation to extending free concessionary bus travel to people seeking asylum in Scotland, given the otherwise fairly onerous conditions they are living under in terms of no recourse to public funds, etc. I'm pleased that your own efforts in the Conveners Committee did press the First Minister to consider the adoption of the policy, and indeed that was successful, though of course, as you mentioned, it did have a mishap when the government did then decline to carry it forward. Welcome news that in the most recent budget the government has included that in its programme. I believe the initial allocation in the budget for 24-25 was £2 million. It remains to be seen the detail of how this latest iteration will be rolled out, and I think that's where the concern of the petitioners continue to lie, that they've already had that stop-start approach in the past from the government, and there's also concern that it will not be on the same statutory footing as the other concessionary travel schemes in Scotland, including the over-60 scheme and the under-22 scheme. And I think there is a desire to ensure that it's done via a statutory instrument and not some tokenistic measure that could simply expire after a year or so. They want a degree of permanence in the process. So I think until that comfort is provided by the government, I would appeal to the committee members to keep the petition open until the government is prepared to furnish this committee with the detail of how the scheme will operate. We've only ever really had a high-level commitment in the budget, but never progressed that into how it will be operationalised. Obviously, there is a real social need and continuing social need for it. There was an expression by government ministers previously that it could be interdicted by adjustments to the no recourse to public funds rule by the Home Secretary. And I think the nature of the change in government since the election means that that risk is less obvious. So I think there is a great opportunity to press ahead with the statutory instrument to introduce this on a sure footing. And until we get that commitment from the government, I think this petition merits remaining open.
Colleagues, we therefore have to consider whether we think there is more that the committee could have oversight of, more of which the committee could have oversight. I can hear my wife committing my grammar as I speak, or whether in fact the committee has taken matters as far as we can. Do we have any suggestions for action? Mr Chowdhury?
I think in light of what Mr Sweeney has said, I think we should write to the Scottish Government seeking further information on the working group with the third sector representatives and other interested parties, especially whether consideration is still being given to the development of a national pilot scheme for the delivery of free bus travel for people seeking asylum, and when it expects this working group to offer recommendation on particular delivery of free bus travel on longer-term basis.
And I think couple that just with a couple of the points Mr Sweeney made as well, in terms of real detail in relation to longer-term commitment, I think was the point. Well, I was kind of minded to let the petition close, but I think on the appeal of Mr Sweeney and in light of Mr Chowdhury's recommendation, are members content for us to continue? We are. Thank you very much. That brings us to petition number 2075 to prioritise local participation in planning decisions. This has been lodged by Stuart Noble on behalf of Helensburgh Community Council, who of course are with us again in the gallery this morning. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to prioritise local participation in planning decisions affecting their area by providing a clear and unambiguous definition of the word local insofar as it applies to planning decisions, giving decision-making powers to community councils for planning applications in their local areas, ensuring that the way in which decisions on planning applications are taken is compatible with the provisions and ethos of the Community Empowerment Act of 2015. And we are joined once again for our consideration of this petition by our colleague Jackie Bailey. Good morning, Ms Bailey. We've missed you on a couple of occasions when we'd very much hoped that you were going to be with us, but other parliamentary business intervened. But nice to have you back with us this morning.
Thank you very much.
We last considered this petition at our meeting the 1st of May last, when we agreed to write to relevant stakeholders seeking their views on the asks of the petition, and copies of the responses we've received are included in the papers for today's meeting. The response from the Scottish Forum of Community Councils states its belief that community councils should be given more responsibility in relation to their existing involvement with local planning applications. The Forum notes that councils could amend their standing orders to devolve power to a sub or ward committee to determine routine planning applications affecting a particular council ward. They also suggest a process to be developed that would enable planning applications to be allocated to one of the 4 following groups for decision, i.e. the full planning committee, a ward-specific committee, community council or planning officer. In its response, the Scottish Government indicated that it expected to publish guidance on effective community engagement in local development planning later in the year, and it did then do that in December 24. We've also received a response from the Royal Town Planning Institute, which outlines its support for community involvement in the planning process. And while they acknowledge concerns about community engagement being a box-ticking exercise, the response offers examples of meaningful community engagement practices that are being carried out across Scotland. The response goes on to state that the role of community councils in the scrutiny of planning applications is well established, and it does not see any justification for the relocation of decision-making powers from local authorities to community councils. So, slight contradiction in the nature of the responses we received. But before we consider what we might do next, can I invite Jackie Bailey to offer her thoughts to the committee?
Thank you very much, Convener, and I am grateful for the Petitions Committee continuing interest in this petition. The fundamental issue is one of local democracy in planning, and I want to centre my remarks on Argyll and Bute because this is the case that the petitioner brings to you. Argyll and Bute Council, for those of you that don't know it, is very disparate in nature. There are small rural villages, there are island communities, and then there are substantial conurbations such as Helensburgh. It wouldn't surprise you that elected members will understandably take different views in different areas based on the needs of their local communities. And this does cause a sense of frustration when one local community is very clear about its thinking, but the planning committee, which, by majority doesn't represent their views or their areas, takes an entirely contrary position. Let me give you one example that's recent. And of course, one was the siting of the new Helensburgh Leisure Centre, opposed by the Helensburgh Community Council because it was in the wrong location. And members may have seen that same Helensburgh Leisure Centre losing its roof during Storm Irwin, captured beautifully on social media, and unfortunately open-air swimming is now back in Helensburgh as a consequence of the storm. But on a serious note, that decision was taken by a planning committee where a majority of the members were not from the local area and in the face of almost unified local opposition as to the siting. The Community Council suggested in their petition that they be involved in planning decisions at local area committee level, and I am very sympathetic to that, and indeed the submission from the Forum of Community Councils talks about the ability to devolve power to local areas. I am in favour of that, but I understand the government doesn't want to legislate in this area, so I wonder if the committee could ask quite a specific point whether an easier way of achieving this, certainly in the case of Argyll and Bute, that would meet the petitioner's objective, is to have the local area committee, of which there are 4 in Argyll and Bute, and based locally, so the one in Helensburgh is Helensburgh and Lomond. It is entirely made up of local elected members, whether final planning decisions could be made there and devolved to them to do, rather than made by people, councillors, who represent entirely different areas. I think there is merit in that if the government would be even willing to compromise a little to enable local decisions to actually be taken by local elected members. I note the convener said the Scottish Government have issued guidance. I'm not sure it covers that point, and I wonder whether the Petitions Committee would invite the government to think again.
I mean, that, I think, Ms Bailey, kind of is incorporated or is emphasising a point within the Scottish Forum of Community Council's suggestion about the different ways in which local concern could be expressed. I did see the footage to which you refer. I'm interested to know, just not that you're here to give evidence, but I'm interested to know when the community thought that was the wrong place for the facility, did they have a different place in mind that would have offered more protection in the circumstances of that storm?
My recollection is they did, and they did point out that being on the peninsula, whilst dramatic if you're in the gym and you can have a view of the Clyde outside, left it very exposed, prone to flooding and prone to the kind of event we saw. I can't recall the exact position, but there are plenty of development opportunities in Helensburgh that the leisure centre could have been placed on.
Yeah. It definitely is a consideration. I mean, some of our communities are quite disparate, and the kind of planning process seems potentially a bit ham-fisted in some instances because the representation can't possibly be localised in that way by the time a majority is taken into account. Do colleagues have any comments or suggestions? Mr Chowdhury?
I think we should take the suggestions from Jackie Bailey to the Scottish Government, ask them if they can reconsider, and write to the Scottish Government to seek its view on the Scottish Forum of Community Council's suggestions for a way of allocating planning decisions to the most appropriate level.
So I think that was the suggestion that came. Are colleagues content? Well, we'll keep the petition open and we will proceed on the basis of your recommendation and that of the Forum of Community Councils. Thank you very much. That brings us back to petition number 1976, which is to backdate council tax discounts for dementia to the date of GP certification. And this has been lodged by Derek James Brown. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to require council tax discounts to be backdated to the date a person was certified as being severely mentally impaired, where they then go on to qualify for a relevant benefit. We last considered this petition on 12th of June last, when we agreed to write to the Scottish Government. The response from the Scottish Government states that removing the requirement for a person to be entitled to a qualifying benefit in order to be disregarded from council tax would require changes to legislation. The Scottish Government was due to explore this further in partnership with local government at what was then to be the next meeting of the Joint Working Group on Council Tax Reform at the end of summer 24. And I think we heard, I think we were quite impressed by this petition, colleagues, when we first heard it. It raised legitimate issues. I don't think we've had an update on the outcome of that conference in 2024, but I wonder if colleagues have got any suggestions for how we might proceed. Mr Golden.
Thanks, Convener. I think we should write to the Scottish Government to seek an update on its work with local government to explore removing the requirement for a person who has been certified as severely mentally impaired to also be entitled to a qualifying benefit in order for them to be disregarded when calculating council tax liability.
Mr Ewing. Yes, I would concur with that, and just rereading some of the papers, I think you observed, Convener, that people should never be denied the benefits to which they're entitled in the evidence session. And I recall it was Mr Brown's, the petitioner's wife, who had severe Alzheimer's disease and took this matter to a tribunal which established that the present law allowed councils to wait until not only GP certification but the somewhat much later event of qualifying benefit was received. And that actually means that governments can limit their liability to pay debt benefits by allowing the process to become protracted and delayed, which is entirely wrong. And I wonder, I'm just going to supplement Mr Bolton's suggestion that because the issue of disability benefits entitlements is very much in the news at the moment, whilst we might specifically ask the Minister to do two things. One, something the Minister failed to do in the original reply, which is to say, does the Scottish Government agree that in principle the petitioner has a strong argument? All it said was it would require a change in the law or practice. It ducked the question of the principle. And secondly, if it does agree that that principle is applicable, and I can't really see how it's not, I mean, it must be, the question about, how severe should disabilities be before you get benefits is a political question. But if you have severe Alzheimer, there's no doubt. So you should be getting the benefits from the date that the diagnosis begins. So I do think that the Scottish Government should take this specifically up with the UK Government as well as a point of principle. And, I commend Mr Brown for being dogged in his pursuit of this principle. And that's why
Are we content, colleagues, with the suggestion, Mr Golden, and from Mr Ewing? And we also write the Scottish Government specifically making the suggestion that has been raised. We are? We are. Thank you. That's what we will do. Petition number 2021 to ensure the definition of protected animals in the Animal Health and Welfare Scotland 2006 Act applies to the sheep on St Kilda. This has been lodged by David Peter Buckland and Graham Charlesworth, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to clarify the definition of protected animals contained in the Animal Health and Welfare Scotland Act of 2006 and associated guidance to ensure the feral sheep on St Kilda are covered by this legislation, enabling interventions to reduce the risk of winter starvation and the consequential suffering of the sheep. We last considered this petition on the 1st of May last when we agreed to write to the Scottish Government. We have received a response from the Scottish Government which states that it does not consider there is a need to clarify the definition of protected animals in the Animal Health and Welfare Scotland Act 2006 and associated guidance. It remains the Government's view that the sheep in St Kilda are protected by the Wild Mammals Protection Act of 1996 in the same way as unowned and unmanaged populations of wild deer. We had also requested a copy of the June 2009 communication between the Scottish Government and the National Trust for Scotland. However, the Government has been unable to locate this document, which was likely deleted from their system in 2019, in line with their retention and disposal policy. We have also received 2 submissions from the petitioners, the first of which comments on submissions from the National Trust for Scotland and the Scottish Government, and refers back to the passage of the 2006 Act and the provision of detailed guidance to explain exactly why and which animals are protected by this legislation. The petitioners also make comparisons with similar legislation in England and Wales. There, the UK Chief Veterinary Officer's interpretation of animals of a kind commonly domesticated in the British Islands, unquote, is such that Soy sheep found in Lundy, an island off north coast of Devon, are considered as feral sheep. This means the sheep are protected under the equivalent legislation in England and Wales and have been subject to humane culling to control the population. The petitioner's second submission provides information on the various FOI requests they have made, with responses revealing that UNESCO have raised concerns about the mismanagement of the sheep population on St Kilda, which would be adversely affecting the outstanding universal value of World Heritage Site, which is recognised for both its natural and cultural significance. Colleagues, thoughts on how we might proceed on this occasion? We can either have another round or go at this, or we can take the view we've kind of run out of steam. Mr. Ewing, Mr. Golden.
I feel we've run out of steam, unfortunately, on this one, and I would recommend closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government does not consider there is a need to clarify the definition of protected animals in the 2006 Act and associated guidance, and also considers the sheep on St Kilda to be protected by the Wild Mammals Protections Act 1996 in the same way as any unowned and unmanaged population of wild deer.
Thank you. I mean, the direction of the government is quite clear in terms of what it intends in this regard, even though it does appear that more is being done elsewhere. But I'm not sure that there is more the committee can do given the Scottish Government's very clear view. Are there any contrary view from members of the committee? So, notwithstanding the importance of the issues raised, are we of the view that there's nothing more the committee can actually do given the Scottish Government's response? We are. So we thank the petitioner for their work on this. It may well be, of course, it could be the subject of a future petition again, but unfortunately that is the view of the Scottish Government, so it limits the manoeuvrability of the committee to come up with further suggestions for action. That brings us to petition number 2074 to increase local government funding to help protect the vulnerable elderly population and prevent the closure of care homes. This has been lodged by Iona Stoddart. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to increase the funding it provides to local councils, enabling them to deliver the best possible health and social care and to help to protect the vulnerable, frail and elderly population from the closure of residential and nursing care homes. We last considered this petition at our meeting on the 1st of May last, when we agreed to write to the Minister for Local Government Empowerment and Planning. We have received a response from the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government in which she argues that the spring budget and autumn statement of the previous UK Government failed to deliver the funding Scotland needs for public services. And the Cabinet Secretary goes on to state that despite financial challenges, the Scottish Government has increased the local government settlement to over £14 billion in 24-25, and members will also be aware that this figure has increased to over £15 billion as part of the recently approved 25-26 budget. The response goes on to note the commitment of local and national government to respect each other's democratic mandates as part of the Verity House Agreement, highlighting that it is up to each democratically elected council how it manages its day-to-day business and decision-making process. Do colleagues have any thoughts on where we go next in relation to this petition? Mr. Chowdhury.
I think we should write to COSLA and seek their view on the petitions, because I feel that the Scottish Government is washing their hands on this. We do need some guidance from COSLA and see if there is something can be done.
So what would you like us to ask COSLA?
We should seek their views of to see if We could write to COSLA to seek their view on the petition and if they believe the action taken by the Scottish Government are enough.
I see, okay. Our colleagues can similarly minded?
Well, I mean, on the face of it, it is a matter for local authorities. But on the other hand, I think, Convener, when this was considered before, I think it was your good self that did suggest that we write to the Minister for Local Government, Empowerment and Planning to seek his reflections on the UK-wide survey by the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives and Senior Managers, which found that 44% of council chief executives and senior managers had identified adult social care as a service that was at risk of cuts due to very large gaps in local government budgets. I'm not prepared to sweep the issues under the carpet until we've heard from the Minister. And we have subsequently heard from the Cabinet Secretary, but I'm not sure that I'm just looking at this reply, and it doesn't seem to me specifically to answer the question that you had raised. I'm not quite sure of that because it's quite a long reply. I've just reread it briefly, but if I'm correct, then that's a question that remains unanswered and therefore should at least be pursued, as well as writing to COSLA, who could no doubt be asked the same question, Convener, to comment on that particular survey. I mean, you could say that all local services are subject to the risk of cuts, and 44% may therefore not be a particularly remarkable statistic, but it is nearly half, and I think we all know that this is a pretty serious issue for care for the elderly population, which is going to become even more serious and more difficult in years to come as the proportion of elderly people and the number of people requiring care increases.
Okay, well, we've got a couple of suggestions forthcoming from Mr Chowdhury and Mr Ewing there. Are we content to keep the petition open and seek further clarification on the basis of their suggestions? We are. That brings us to the last of our continuing petitions this morning, which is petition number 2087, to pass a law making exercising a dog in a cemetery an offence. This was lodged by Paul Irvine. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to pass a law making exercising a dog in a cemetery an offence punishable by an on-the-spot fine for infringement. This was last considered at our meeting on the 29th of May 24, when we agreed to write to COSLA, Police Scotland and the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government's response states that it is proposing a requirement for each burial authority to prepare and maintain a management plan which will apply to all the burial grounds for which the authority has responsibility. Burial authorities will not be required to record their decision on dog access within the management plan, but they could choose to set out their position in the plan if they wish. The submission states that burial regulations will not create any new rules in relation to dogs, and that the decision on whether to permit dogs on burial grounds will remain at the discretion of each burial authority based on local factors. Do colleagues have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr Golden, fresh back from Crufts.
Correct, yes. Looking out for my next pedigree pooch. I think, I mean, this is already covered by existing legislation, but this Parliament has set precedents where they would go beyond what is already covered on a specific occasion. So I think we should follow up at least once more, perhaps finally, to write to local authorities seeking information on each local authority's policy on the presence and behaviour of dogs in cemeteries, the number of complaints received regarding the behaviour of dog in cemeteries, and also if there's any monitoring of usage of cemeteries. I am aware that in many parts of Scotland, a cemetery is, for lots of people, dog walkers or otherwise, a place where they can access green space. And actually, it'd be interesting to find out if local authorities are looking into this, and indeed if any fines for breaching the current legislation have been issued in cemeteries.
Thank you, Mr Golden. Are we content? Were you seeking to contribute, Mr Ewing? Sorry.
Just briefly, I do agree entirely with Mr Golden. I mean, the law exists, but if it's not enforced, it's just words on a page.
Yeah.
And I think the worry here, particularly perhaps, is that might be applicable here. And also the petitioner, who's in particular tragic circumstances, I recall, of burying his 3-year-old son in a cemetery just opposite his home, and visiting the cemetery every day, and he said hundreds of people have dogs, and it's more or less a dog's toilet. And, you know, this is not appropriate for cemeteries. It's just not. You cannot allow this to happen. So, you know, I do think that Mr. Golden's suggestion that we shouldn't just let this go is correct, and we should ask information about whether the law is being enforced or not. Otherwise, you know, I suspect the issue will just come back again, and people will say, why didn't you at least try to find out what local authorities are doing about it? Some cemeteries, as I'm sure we all know, are particularly large, and, you know, and therefore, you know, I can well imagine them being used for dog walking, but it's not really appropriate to use cemeteries for dog walking any more than it's appropriate to have dogs in fields with livestock. And that's another serious problem, which is not really properly addressed in the law, even after the Members' Bill, because dogs aren't required to be kept on a leash. So you know, I'm sorry to be a bit long-winded, but I do think we should pursue that.
I mean, I take Mr. Golden's point. I mean, in some urban areas, I imagine that is the nearest thing there is to a green space within the local community. But it's the way in which these things are managed or handled, and I suppose it would be useful for us to find out what local authorities actually view there is of all of this, and whether there is any enforcement taking place. So, Mr. Chowdhury, you have a thought too?
Yeah, I think we need to keep in mind that a lot of religious people believe in, you know, a lot of people don't like dogs or anything walking over their graves, or, you know, I think we need to start respecting. But can you ask the local councils as well if they have enough signs that, you know, on the cemetery that it's clear that there shouldn't be any dog.
I mean, but I'm also aware, though, that there are some dogs that go and sit and by the grave of the person that they were formerly owned by, and, you know, that they're very sensitive to the reality of these things. So, I mean, I don't know, but I'd be very interested to hear, I think, the evidence, the response to the requests that we're going to make. Thank you. That brings us to agenda item 3, which is the consideration of new petitions. Before we do so, just as I always do, I indicate to those who might be joining us online to hear their petition reviewed for the first time that there are 2 actions we take in advance of a consideration of a new petition. We invite the Scottish Parliament's independent research body, SPICE, to give us a proper briefing on the issues underpinning the petition that's been raised. And we also contact the Scottish Government to get a preliminary view from them. And the reason we take both those actions is that historically, when the committee met to consider a new petition, if we hadn't done those 2 things in advance, we simply agreed to do those 2 things that delayed the then proper consideration of the petition. So all of this is in order to expedite the detailed consideration of the issues raised. The first of the new petitions this morning is petition number 2133 to expand ScotRail's inter-7 city routes to include Dunfermline. It's been lodged by Andrew Wedge, and it calls on exactly what it says on the tin of the petition, which is to urge the Scottish Government to ensure every city in Scotland has a direct express rail connection to each other by expanding ScotRail's inter-7 city routes to include Scotland's newest city of Dunfermline. The petitioner suggests that the procurement of a replacement for the high-speed train fleet which operates on the intercity routes should be used as an opportunity to expand the intercity routes and to improve connectivity between all Scotland's cities. As the SPICE briefing notes, Dunfermline was granted city status in 2022 and has 2 railway stations, both of which are located on the Fife Circle line and are regularly served by direct trains from Edinburgh, Glenrothes, with Thornton and Cowdenbeath. The briefing also draws our attention to ScotRail's Fit for the Future consultation, which included a proposal for direct service from Dunfermline to Dundee or Perth, but as the proposal received negative feedback, it was then not taken forward. The Cabinet Secretary for Transport acknowledges that the proposal being put forward in this petition is a reasonable one, which has been given, and I quote, detailed consideration over recent years by ScotRail, Network Rail and Transport Scotland. The Cabinet Secretary's response goes on to note that while the proposal for an hourly Edinburgh to Perth via Dunfermline service was withdrawn, options to develop and enhance rail connectivity in Fife will be kept under review. The response also includes information on the appraisal for passenger services on the Alloa to Dunfermline line, which was not recommended within the set of national priorities for investment as part of the second Strategic Transport Projects Review. Again, the Cabinet Secretary has indicated Transport Scotland will keep this under review, subject to a strong business case being developed and suitable funding being available to support this change. Now, we've also received a submission from the petitioner commenting on the response provided by the Cabinet Secretary and suggesting that a small amount of feedback from Perth residents and a minor increase in journey time due to the additional stops in North Fife resulted in Dunfermline losing out on the proposed hourly Edinburgh to Perth via Dunfermline service. The petitioner draws our attention to the growing populations in Dunfermline and West Fife, with further housing developments under construction, and emphasises the need for further investment in the infrastructure to support this growth. Mr Wedge also raises concerns about the extensive journey time for passengers travelling from Fife to Glasgow or Stirling, and suggests ScotRail could make use of existing but less used lines to offer direct express services, which would also help reduce pressure of the existing pinch points such as Haymarket. So, sorry, quite a comprehensive introduction to this new petition, with some quite detailed responses having been received. Do colleagues have any comments or suggestions for action? I'm not sure, given the Cabinet Secretary's response, that there's anything we can do directly in relation to the petition. I mean, I'm reluctant. I just feel there might have been more information to seek, but I feel we've had quite a strong direction at this stage. But I don't know whether colleagues feel there's more we could potentially do, or whether there isn't, really. Mr Ewing?
Well, I mean, my instinct is you're probably right, and I say so mindful of the huge pressures on the transport budget in all respects. That having said that, you know, it is a new petition, convener, and I wonder if there is a suggestion that we could write to Transport Scotland and to ScotRail to ask whether the proposal to reopen the Alloa to Dunfermline line for passenger services will be reviewed in light of what the petitioner has described at some length in their response to the Minister as a very significant housing development in the West Fife area, and generally development in the area around that area and Rosyth and so on. And also what consideration has been given to using connections to provide rail services linking Dunfermline with Glasgow and Stirling without the need to go via Edinburgh. I mean, it would at least get on the record from Transport Scotland and ScotRail what exactly they are saying about that. I suspect strongly once we get those responses within a few weeks perhaps, we may conclude that with the elections next year, it's really a matter for debate at that time, and a matter of each party setting out its priorities for what it believes should be the improvements that they would support in the next session of Parliament, and that would be part of the process. But you know, because it's a new petition, I think we owe it to the petitioners to try and get that further information for them at the very least.
Yep. I think probably I was looking for ways in which we might be able to do that, so I'm content that we do. So are colleagues content that we take that forward on that basis? We are. Okay, the next of our petitions this morning is petition 2134 to introduce legislation to make it a requirement for Swift bricks to be installed in all new developments in Scotland and to include Swifts in building surveys. This has been lodged by Callie Smith on behalf of Huntley Swift Group NES Swifts. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to help reverse the decline in swift populations by introducing legislation that would make swift nesting bricks a requirement for all new build developments in Scotland, as well as making it mandatory to include swifts in all ecological building surveys. As the background to the petition tells us, swifts were added to the UK Red List for conservation in 2021, with nest site loss considered to be one of the factors contributing to a 62% decline in the swift population since 1998. The Spice briefing we've received notes other possible causes for the decline, those being poor summer weather and a decline in insect numbers, this being the main food source for swifts. In its response to the petition, the Scottish Government highlighted that the improving biodiversity is a cross-cutting outcome with the National Planning Framework, also referred to as NPF4, with Policy 3 noted as playing, and I quote, a critical role in ensuring that development will secure positive effects for biodiversity. Now, the response goes on to note the work which Nature Scott to finalise its Developing with Nature guidance, and this was then published in 2023, and it describes, and I quote, a number of measures that development can incorporate to conserve, restore and enhance nature. It is in light of the policies contained in NPF4 and supporting guidance that the Scottish Government does not consider it necessary to mandate the use of swift bricks or other individual measures, though it does acknowledge that they may be an important and helpful intervention in some developments. We've also received 2 submissions from the petitioner, the first of which adds further clarity to the ask of their petition for a requirement to include swift bricks in all, and I emphasise the word here, suitable new developments, and includes information on how this can be achieved in most new buildings. The petitioner's second submission responds to the Scottish Government's submission, and it makes clear that swift bricks are a universal provision that could be used to serve other cavity nesting birds species such as sparrow, house martin and starling. While appreciating the Developing with Nature guidance, the petitioner suggests that the enhancements this guidance suggests are rarely being made. The submission also highlights that ecological surveys rarely include swifts, and where they are, the timing of the survey out with the peak breeding season of June and July often gives a nil or poor record of swift activity. Do members have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr. Ewing?
I mean, I was struck that the ministerial response was quite detailed and did specifically point to the provisions in the National Planning Framework which allow, which require such environmental matters to be considered at a general level. I'm not sure that law can be quite as specific as the petitioner is asking, and I was not quite certain as to whether or not the word suitable has been incorporated in the petition. Namely, that the call is only for the mandatory use of these bricks to be in suitable premises, because, as I understand the petitioner, they argue that not all house construction is suitable because the houses are not more than 1 or 2 metres apart. Then, it's simply not practical for birds to fly in and out because the buildings are too close. So, on the one hand, there seems to be, I think the word suitable, from what I can gather from the papers, is inserted, but even if it is, I do think the current planning framework allows for these things to be considered, and no doubt at a local level where there is a strong swift population, this would be raised. So, I mean, I'm open to hear what other colleagues say, but I'm not really sure there's much more we can do with this petition. I suspect if we write to pressure groups, they will just ask us to support the petition, and if we write to builders, they will say not to support the petition. So we could do that, of course, but I'm not sure it's going to take us any further, particularly since we've got a very copious response from Spice and the Minister already. So,
moreover, Mr. Ewing, I mean, the Government have indicated that they intend to review the building standard on sustainable development, so there's further opportunities for this to be incorporated at that point. I mean, I think what you're suggesting is that on this occasion, we would move to close this petition on the basis of the substantive responses received.
It can be brought back in some form quite easily if
these
after
things
the
are
review,
fulfilled.
And I know they argue that the current system is not working, but that is disputed. But if after the current review it's still not working, it's open to them to bring it back, perhaps to the next Parliament.
Okay, I understand. On that basis, colleagues, are we minded in review of the responses received from Mr. Ewing's analysis to close this petition on this occasion? Mr. Chowdhury, are you content with that? We are. So we thank the petitioner, but in view of the responses received, I think that is the conclusion that the committee has come to. But should these reviews not lead to any improvement, then it would be possible in the next session of Parliament for a fresh petition to be raised. That brings us to the last of this morning's new petitions, which is petition number 2136, to make non-fatal strangulation a standalone criminal offence in Scotland. And this has been lodged by Fiona Druitt. We are joined in our consideration of this petition by our MSP colleague Tess White. Good morning, Miss White, and I believe you have been accompanied to the committee this morning by the petitioner, who is also in the gallery. Good morning. You'll forgive me, actually, my eyesight's so bad, I just have to assume that the petitioner is in the gallery. We are joined, the petition calls on the Scottish Government to urge the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to make non-fatal strangulation a standalone criminal offence in Scotland. The Spice briefing notes that in 2023, a publication on the prevalence of strangulation and suffocation found that 1 in 4 women accessing community and refuge services reported that they had experienced strangulation or suffocation. That's 1 in 4. Other jurisdictions have introduced a standalone offence for non-fatal strangulation in recent years. England and Wales created the standalone offence of strangulation or suffocation, and this came into force in June 2022. Northern Ireland created a new offence of non-fatal strangulation or asphyxiation, and this came into force on the 26th of June 2023. Ireland created the standalone offence of non-fatal strangulation and non-fatal suffocation, and that commenced on the 1st of November 2023. The reason for introducing the standalone offence in all these countries has been noted as ensuring that perpetrators could be charged and prosecuted with a sufficiently serious offence, even in the absence of physical injuries. The petitioner's submission argues that Scotland must keep pace with these changes by introducing non-fatal strangulation as a standalone criminal offence. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs has responded to the petition. Her submission states the Scottish Government will actually give serious consideration to the petition and emphasises the importance of understanding how any new law would interact with the offence of domestic abuse. Scottish Government officials will continue to progress in considerations in this area, including through discussions with operational partners. Now, the petitioner's written submission states that the act of non-fatal strangulation can cause brain damage, organ failure, long-term physical and mental health problems, and increases the risk of strokes and neurological disorders. The petitioner argues that establishing non-fatal strangulation as a standalone offence in Scotland would signal zero tolerance for such acts, ensure appropriate consequences for perpetrators, and enhance victim protection. And she believes that it would also deter future harm and reinforce Scotland's commitment to addressing domestic abuse. And colleagues, I think, may also have seen a degree of press reporting over the weekend in relation to issues similar to those raised by this petition. Before I invite the committee to ask for comments on what we might now do, can I ask Tess White if there's anything she would like to offer by way of her thoughts to the committee? Ms. White.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Committee. So I'm grateful to the committee for the opportunity to speak to PE 2136. I'd also like to pay tribute to the petitioner Fiona Druitt, who's here in the committee room. Fiona lost her daughter Emily in the most tragic circumstances after her boyfriend abused her while they were students at the University of Aberdeen. And I first became aware of the devastating physical and psychological impact of choking a sexual partner during a parliamentary event I held with the Women's Support Service Byres Place towards the end of last year. And before that, it had not come to my attention. But once you've seen and you know about something, you can't stop and you have to do something about it. So, as you've said, Convener, devastating effects. Within 6 to 8 seconds, a woman loses consciousness. After 15 seconds, her bladder will be incontinent. After 30 seconds, her bowels will open. She will be brain dead within 4 minutes. And as Fiona has said herself, no woman or girl could ever consent to this, because there comes a point where a woman or a girl is physically unable to do anything about it. How can you consent to something if you lose consciousness? So it's not breath play. That's a euphemism that where men use to say, oh, it's just breath play during sexual intimacy. It isn't. It's truly frightening, and it can predict dangerous and potentially fatal behaviour. So the petition, as you've rightly said, Convener, calls for a standalone criminal offence for non-fatal strangulation. And my view is that the common law offence of assault doesn't adequately capture the complexity of it's a startling and ever-growing problem. So recognising that non-fatal strangulation can occur without obvious physical injury, as the committee has just heard, England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Ireland have already introduced standalone offences with robust penalties. Now, I do note, and Fiona Drouet also notes, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice concerns over the unintended consequences and what she said to the committee of a separate law, especially regarding, as she says, domestic abuse legislation. But that doesn't cover two key points. It is a form of abuse and control. And yes, it can be part of domestic abuse, but it's part of violence against women and it's a non-consensual act. So whilst I acknowledge we do need to stress test any changes to the current law in Scotland, I'm massively concerned that the Scottish Government is kicking the can down the road. This feels like yet another issue impacting women that's being pushed to the bottom of the legislative agenda. So finally, Convener and committee, please, we've got a year to go. Please don't allow this to lose. It could be your daughters or it could be your nieces. So something that needs to be done. The Scottish Government now has an opportunity to signal a zero tolerance approach to non-fatal strangulation, and I urge it to act with the urgency this issue deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Tess White. I think reading through the papers we received and the detail, this too was a practice of which I was largely unaware, and as you say, in confronted with the detail of it, it does seem that there really is a requirement for Parliament to be proactive and for the government to take a legislative lead, particularly in the light of the fact that other parliaments across these islands have already taken that step, and it doesn't seem really adequate that Scotland should be trying to find difficulties where clear direction is actually required and is being given by legislative and the legal framework provided elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Colleagues, I don't know if people feel similarly, but other views as to how we might proceed. I mean, I think I would have thought we really need to be very direct in our questions to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs, because I don't think we want to allow this to languish. Are there any suggestions as to what we might seek to clarify with the Cabinet Secretary? Mr. Golden?
I think, obviously, we've got data from elsewhere in the UK, but I notice the Cabinet Secretary makes the point that such an offender can be sentenced up to life imprisonment. But I am not clear, based on the data for Scotland, if indeed that the High Court has dealt with such cases, and it's ultimately only the High Court that could sentence up to life imprisonment. I suspect, although I don't know, that many of these offences are going to the Sheriff Court, which would lead to up to 5 years imprisonment, which is significantly different from the suggestion the Cabinet Secretary has made. So I wonder if we can attempt to find out where these offences are going, how many there are in Scotland. I appreciate it will be under common law, but it is possible that with work that we can find out some of the statistics, and that would at least clarify the point regarding the life imprisonment suggestion.
Okay. Any others? Mr. Ewing?
Well, yes, I agree with that, and I do think we should write to the Minister to seek further data about the extent to which sexual assaults involving strangulation have been treated differently, and find out what data there is as to in how many cases this was found to have been the case, what analysis there is of those statistics. Do actually they exist in the current form? Are they retained properly? As Mr Golden says, the Sheriff has limited sentencing powers, although I think it's possible. It's been a long time since I was in the Sheriff Court, 3 decades, but I think it's possible for a Sheriff to remit sentence to the High Court if the Sheriff feels that his sentencing power maximum is inadequate. But be that as it may, this should really be going in solemn procedure, I would have thought, in every case, not least because, as the petitioner points out, non-fatal strangulation is often signalling a heightened risk of homicide, and quite staggering reports from a BBC survey that 40% of UK women aged 18 to 39 reported experiencing choking, strangulation or gagging during sex. Quite a hugely worrying percentage. So I think we should seek further data from the Minister. I wonder if we might just go, and I think we should also seek details of when officials are going to meet with partners, and that, in our view, this should be approached with great urgency and not left to drift for months and months, as so many things do. And also whether officials and the Minister will engage directly with the petitioner and get a timeline for the work. And I wonder if we could also indicate, when asking for all this, that we may well be minded to hear evidence from the Cabinet Secretary, given the interest about this. All the other countries seem to have taken action to deal with this in the UK. Why are we at the coup's tail? Instinctively, I feel that the current system, although in theory it can work, in practice probably is not working as it should. So I'm grateful to Tess White for setting matters out with such lucidity today, and it is an extremely serious matter before us. So I just wanted to supplement what Mr Golden suggested with those remarks.
Mr Chowdhury, have you anything to add?
I think I agree with colleagues. I think it's very important. We should put a timeline to this as well, and ask the Scottish Government to work with the petitioner and give us a timeline as well.
Yes, I'm minded very much to seek to clarify that point in particular, given the Parliament now only has 14 months to run. I think it's important that we try and put some momentum behind anything that is being considered or justified or not done or done, in order that we get the aims of the petition progressed. So are we, Mr Ewing?
I just wanted to point out, to be fair to the Cabinet Secretary, I mean, she has said, I remain open-minded towards the proposal. So this is not a case where this government has said, well, no, we're not doing that, in which case, our response at this stage of our Parliament is, well, look, let's leave it to the next election and people can vote for the parties that will do what they feel is correct in the democracy. We're not at that stage. If the Minister thinks it can be done, why can't it be done soon? Why can't it be done before the next election? Why can't we just do things in this Parliament, in this government?
Exactly. So are we content that's the view that we want to take? So we thank the petitioner. We'll be keeping the petition open and we'll be taking forward the aims of the petition as suggested. And we thank Tess White for your contribution as well. And that brings us to the end of the public part of our meeting. Oh, just one final point I wanted to put on the record. And that is in relation to petition number 2056. It is the case, which is petition number 2056, which is to introduce legislation allowing Scottish ministers to intervene in the hire of public land. I'm very sorry to say that, having written back to the Scottish Government following what we felt was an incomplete response previously, the Government have sent back more or less the same response to us again. And I feel that is a discourtesy to this committee, and therefore, with the committee's permission, I would like us to write very specifically to the government, drawing their attention to the actual question we want asked, we are asking, and the answer to that question is the one we wish to have, not some generalised answer on the issue which isn't relevant to the point we are putting. Are colleagues content that we write slightly directly to the Scottish Government, asking them to actually answer the question we're putting? Colleagues are content. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of the public part of this morning's meeting. We now move into private session. And we next meet on Wednesday, the 2nd of April.